the 5e rule set. However, these might apply to other fantasy or similar core-based rule sets. Be a little different, might look a little different, but kind of works the same way as far as Fantasy Grounds functionality. Not going to really be a lesson in Dungeons and Dragons because that is covered in lots of other videos on YouTube. And if you have the core rulebook, some of the concepts of the encounter building, XP, and CR value, like the challenge ratings, are covered in the rule books, like the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual. I'm using the 2024 5e rule set, and this theme here is a free theme that comes with the Fantasy Grounds platform. This is the official D&D 2024 rebranded, basically Fantasy Grounds theme. And by the way, Fantasy Grounds Academy is just a fan community. We're not paid to do this. We don't work directly with Force Smiteworks, although we do try to work with them as best we can. And what I wanted to go over was some of the best practices and some of the things that you may want to learn about encounters. Now, I have in my library, I have the 5e Dungeon Master's Guide, I have the Monster Manual, I have the Player's Handbook, and I have an adventure. This is Quest from the Infinite Staircase. So technically, when you're running this, you'll be running either out of this book format, or you will be running it kind of spontaneously from your own homebrew content. So we're going to cover mostly the pre-made stuff so you kind of have an understanding of what this is. So if you're going to run something, you'll notice that most of the encounters, if not all, are already built for you. So if you go over to the right-hand side under Campaign and the data on the right-hand side, you click on that and you go to Encounters. These are already built for the adventure. So, for example, this is B11, the Barracks of Gorm. So this has 2 encounters, I noticed, and they're probably scaled for different levels. So that's one way that you can sort of get a feel for how strong your party is, and then kind of build up to a larger combat instead of putting them through a large or difficult challenge. So you have 2 different challenge ratings here. This is a CR 1/4, and this is a CR 1. So these are a little bit more powerful. One of these is the more powerful. You also have these icons up here that you can add these directly from here to the combat tracker. So if you wanted to place this one without even having a map or anything, you can click on this and it'll add it to the combat tracker. And as you can see over here, these are all added. And if you want to know what map these are on, once they're added to the combat tracker, you can double click on the actual icon here, and that'll bring up the map that they're on. So that's an important thing. Without that, it'll be difficult to know which map they're on unless you've gone through the entire adventure and you've explored that. So let's expand the map out a little bit. I'm going to close some of these windows so it's not too crazy here. And I want to go through both of these and see why we have 2 of them. I'm pretty certain that it is for scaling. Like if you don't want a super hard, difficult encounter, you can possibly have both of these. So I want to see what else we have. So we have B11 here, which is this room on the map. And I'll zoom in. So this has already been added to the combat tracker. These aren't visible yet until you actually make them visible in the combat tracker. So these were already pre-placed before, and all you have to do is when your players come to this room, they open the door, they go in, and then you can reveal all of them at once, or you can reveal them one at a time on the combat tracker. So I'm going to reveal them all at once. And once you do that, they should all be visible to your players at that point. These were pre-placed at the time that the module was converted. Now, if you're going to have your own homebrew stuff, or you wanted to change some of this, you can. So let's go over that. But I want to see where these actually end up. So I'm going to go to the menu, and I'm going to go to delete from the combat tracker and delete only foes. So that's going to get rid of that encounter temporarily. It's still placed because you have these check marks. That means that the tokens are placed, but I want to see where this one gets placed as well. So I'm going to go ahead and double click, or actually click on add to the combat tracker up here on top. And now I'm going to double click on this token and see what comes up. So they're in B12. So I think that might be a typo or an error, because this says B11, but it's actually B12. So whatever that is in the adventure. So this might be, I might need to report this to Zacchaeus or to those that are editing these adventures. So that's an issue. I really thought, honestly, there was 2 of these, and that these were supposed to be separate by CR level. But what I'm noticing here is that they're in a different area, but they're both labeled B11. So I want to go ahead and look at the adventure later. I'll go ahead and check that out. But nonetheless, if you want to customize these, let's say you don't want it to be as difficult, you can unlock these. And let's just say you wanted to make this encounter a little bit less difficult. So you can uncheck these, which is to unplace them, and change this quantity to 2. And now what you have is just 2 placed encounters with the boss here. So if I send this to the combat tracker now, let me actually delete these secondary ones here. And now let's go ahead and hit the add to tracker, or you can drag this link into the combat tracker, however you want to do it. And now you only have 3 here. So instead of having this really big encounter, you basically cut it in half. And you're able to do that on the fly by unlocking and just adjusting the NPCs that are placed already by unchecking the check marks and then changing the quantity. And if you want the CR value and the XP to change, you can just hit refresh on these and it will update these numbers. So that's basically the easiest way to adjust it. There could be a situation where, let's say, these Guardians of Gorm, you can actually take one of these and make another instance of it. So I could take this link, drag and drop it here, and that'll add another instance. And let's say I want to update this to 2, but now maybe you don't want the same token, right? So if you wanted to use a different token, if you have the asset, or maybe you have something that you would want to use instead, you have these tokens here, but maybe you want to use something different. So if you go to your assets and click on tokens, you can do a search. So I'll just do warrior, I guess, something like that, and let it do its thing. Let it search through the token database that I have. And it's going to take a couple seconds because I have like 50 gazillion tokens. So bear with me as it kind of goes through the library and checks out everything I have. And warrior may not have been a good key search because there's probably 50 gazillion tokens with that name in there. So we'll see. But that's basically, you can change the token here instead of having to make another NPC directly. Like, you don't need to make an NPC entry. All you have to do in that case is just change the token. It'll swap out the token type. So that way you're not using the same tokens for different waves or for different types of creatures with the different attacks. So for instance, if you had like 4 guardians, but 4 of them use different type of attack, like maybe they're archers or something, then you could do something like that. So you could take and add a different token type that would represent the type of combatant. Or maybe they both have, maybe the NPCs have different weapons. Maybe they have melee and then they have like range. So you can break it up to like half and half, just using a token change, which would probably be a little easier in the long run. So let's see what we can do here. So I want to do, we'll just do archer. Let's try that. So this is just something that you can do on the fly if you have the tokens. Even if you don't have the tokens, you can use the letter tokens that come with Fantasy Grounds. You can just say like R for range and M for melee. So if you didn't have any fancy colorful tokens, you can just use the letter tokens as well. It just depends on how you want to present the story to your players or how much difference it's going to make. So we'll just pretend that these skeletal archers or something like that is going to be our NPC token that we want. So let's go back. I want to see what I have here because I have my own collection. Yeah, so you can do something like that, but just any token that you want, like maybe hero tokens. Let's do something like this. So you could take this token and drag and drop it on the main token on the line that has the actual NPC entry. And once you do that, it changes all the tokens on this line. So now you could take those and drag and drop and place them ahead of time. So I'm going to put one in each corner. And then you do this right before your combat. If you do it during combat, your players will see those. But when you actually close this encounter, they will disappear. But once you bring that encounter back up in the actual combat tracker or anything like that, they will appear, but they'll be grayed out until you actually unveil them. So that encounter can be dragged back over. But see, now that's a copy of the encounter that actually originally came with it. So if I click on this link here, which is the room, and then I go into here, let's say, for instance, if I go in here and go to this encounter, now it has the changes that I made, and they're already placed. So now I can replace that on the combat tracker, and they'll be all added there. And by default, they're not showing, but they are on the map, ready to go. So when your players come through the door, you can unveil them, provided there's the right lighting or such, and then go from there. So you can modify these by unlocking an encounter. You can rename this, so maybe instead of Guardians of Gorm, maybe say Gorm Archers. So you do this a little bit before or ahead of your combat. And then that way you can adjust these to your liking. The other thing I would kind of suggest, as a kind of just from using Fantasy Grounds for so long, is that you try to avoid large encounters all at once. So breaking it up into a couple pieces might be better. So for this, there's only 5 entries here. That's not bad. When you get past like 10 or 12 creatures, the combat tracker gets pretty loaded up, and sometimes you might experience a little bit of a kind of lag or some kind of performance issues because you have all this line of sight calculation going on, and then you also have players and such, and when it's trying to update that with all these different entries in the combat tracker plus all your players, it can be kind of taxing on your system. And if your players have old computers, you know, that could also play into it. So in that case, if you had, let's say, a large encounter with a bunch of goblins, instead of putting all 12 of them on, I would do like maybe 3 encounters of 4, or perhaps just 2 encounters with 6 each. And that way you can bring them in waves, and you can kind of split it up so it's not so hard on the system. And it also helps you control the flow of the combat a little bit better. And it also speeds things up. So you're not having to advance through this combat tracker through, 20 different entries. So that does help a little bit in kind of breaking it up so that it's not too overwhelming on your system, but then it's not too overwhelming on the game master and the player. So that can be a thing that you'll have to kind of get used to. And as you get used to running encounters, it'll make more sense to you as you start using the platform more. Because there's 2 sides to this. You have the D&D stuff, or whatever rule set you're using, and then you have the Fantasy Ground stuff. So they do kind of go hand in hand, but there are some things that you'll have to kind of get used to. So for instance, all the stuff I'm showing you with the Fantasy Grounds combat tracker and the encounters, that's more on the Fantasy Grounds side. But then, scaling the encounter, knowing what the CR value is and all that stuff kind of comes from the rule set. So you're going to have to kind of get used to both sides of that, because you have people who are really good with the rule set, but they may not know much about Fantasy Grounds. Then you got people who are really good with Fantasy Grounds, but they know very little about the rules. So it's kind of a happy medium between those two things. So learning the platform and learning the rules kind of go hand in hand, but it helps when you actually use the platform with the rule set to get a really good foundation of how to run your encounters and how to use things in the Fantasy Grounds platform. So it does take some practice, and like I said, over here on the right, this is all the encounters that are included in the adventure, and this is a pretty large one. This is the Infinite Staircase. So this is the quest from the Infinite Staircase. This B11, I imagine it's in one of the books. So if I go to books and I click on Infinite Staircase, it's probably in one of these adventures. I don't know what B stands for, but I imagine it's probably this Lost City or one of the adventures. I'm not sure what adventure that encounter is in. And that's one thing you could check if you needed to know. Like, let's look up Gorm. So you could do a search here to get an idea. So Guardians of Gorm. So this is the stat block for it. And then here's where it appears. Like, there's a statue room. So this would help you kind of narrow down where this shows up in the adventure. So this is probably, it looks almost like an older, I guess like a Greyhawk adventure, if I mistakenly. Let's see, what do we got here? So Buried Ziggurat. But anyway, so that's kind of how the encounters are built. They usually build them out as an encounter, and then they'll link them to a map. So in this case, these encounters are linked to the map here. So B12 has an encounter as well. And then in the encounter link, or in the room link, there is the actual encounter, which is already placed. So B12. So if I wanted to add that to the combat tracker after we solved B11, then what we could do is hit this add to combat tracker, and that adds this. But see, as you get too many entries on here, it's going to be kind of tough on Fantasy Grounds. So I would probably run about 3 or 4 rounds, depending on who's left standing and how many people you got, and then introduce the other encounter instead of all at once. It's really tough on the system. But nonetheless, these guys are down here. But what I don't understand is I had an issue earlier, but I'm going to do that offline. But anyhow, you guys take care. Have a good afternoon. And this is just a quick way to kind of get into adjusting your encounter. So you open up the encounter, unlock it, make the changes that you need, replace them on the map if necessary, if they're already placed with these check marks. And if they're not, or you want to make some adjustments, you can uncheck these so they're not already pre-placed. And then you can right-click and you can delete all the tokens, and you can start over and replace them yourself. Like I had these Gorm archers, maybe I'll have those individuals up here. And as you drag and drop them, it places this little check mark. And then maybe I'll have one here and one over here, kind of guarding the door. And then Artha, like the boss, will be over here on the opposite side of the door. So you can do that, and then once you've made those adjustments, you can either lock it and then send it to the combat tracker. And I'm going to actually clean this up before I send it because I already got too many on there. So delete from combat tracker, delete only foes. So that's what I want to. So delete only foes. So anyways, that's how you can, you can change your encounters depending on what you're doing.